materialist, but frankly, it's a leap of faith. It's simply belief that they never even tested and don't even know how to test. Without elaborating on this, let's simply work within this worldview, which has such an enormous amount of depth of experience, corroborated generation after generation, about 100 generations since the time of the Buddha. Consciousness continues on in an individual continuum. And when we take really seriously take that into account, to my mind, perhaps the most important issue, the most pressing issue, is can we maintain a continuity of practice from lifetime to lifetime? If we can't, then what we do in this lifetime is kind of like almost insignificant. So you practice really well this lifetime, but then you lose the thread. No connection with Dharma, no teachers, no Dharma. You're on your own. And imagine that. You're on the own. You don't even know the word Dharma. The notion of bodhicitta doesn't blah, 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 blah. It has no meaning at all. Imagine that. And you have the next one being completely without a compass, no map, no nothing. You're just, there you are in the middle of the ocean of samsara. How do you think the next life is going to turn out? It goes from confusion to confusion, bewilderment to bewilderment. And so the continuity just strikes me, this has been true in my own worldview for a very long time. Continuity just seems like the most important thing. Not whether we achieve shamatha in this lifetime, or bodhicitta this lifetime, and so forth and so on. That's all very nice, it would be great. But if we've not so rooted on our practice, that we can have a strong confidence that however far we may or may not progress in this lifetime, which frankly is not under our control, we can't just try harder and then do better. It doesn't work that way. We'll simply do as well as we can. Whether we live short life, long life, well, we can't control that either. But where can we have that confidence of continuity, without which I would say all is lost, really. And from my perspective, and this is true, all is lost. If I don't even have continuity with Dharma in my next lifetime, then what the hell was I doing in this lifetime? Really. I just piss it all away for nothing, So I'm just speaking first person. And so where does that confidence come from? Well, from refuge. That's big. From bodhicitta, refuge to just follow the teachings of the Buddha, the path of the Buddha, to connect with the Buddha himself, with his Dharma, with the Sangha, to meet teachers, qualified teachers. Refuge is enormous. Together with that, the Guru Yoga is enormous. To connect long-term to the Mahayana path, that we set out on a path that will be uninterrupted all the way to perfect enlightenment. Bodhicitta, of course. Bodhicitta all the way through. And just being aware of something so enormously important, and that is virtue. Virtue, whether it's cultivating compassion, the four immeasurables, and so on and so on. Virtue can be directed in all different kinds of ways. Beatrice, do I have your full attention? Hi. Because this is important. Miss this, you've missed everything. One could lead an enormously virtuous life. Generous, ethical, kind, compassionate, altruistic, patient, and all the while wishing to be a famous movie star. Or win an Olympic gold medal. Or you name it, And guess what? If you don't realize your aspiration, you don't become, a famous movie star or the billionaire, etc., etc., if you don't realize it, but that's what you really were hoping for. That was the motivation. Guess what? That's where you're going in the next lifetime. All that virtue will go to, if you want to be a movie star, probably be helpful to be attractive. Not necessary, but it can give you an edge. So you'll be gorgeous. You'll be fantastic, drop-dead handsome. And you'll find the agents coming and so forth and so on. That's where it's going. It's that unfulfilled wish. In Tibetan it's called lecho, that residual karma of something that was aspired for but not reached. And whatever it is, you want a Maserati, you want a gorgeous wife or a fantastic husband, etc., etc. That unrealized aspiration, if there's virtue, that virtue can then go to fulfill being a billionaire, being famous, being rich, having a ranch, having a Maserati. That's where it will go. Because that's what you really wanted. While you're reciting the verses of refuge and bodhicitta, what you really wanted was something else. Good, it's actually going to what you really wanted, and not to what you're saying. Right. That's where it's going. So that's where bodhicitta really comes in. It's kind of like your life preserver. Because if that aspiration of bodhicitta, let alone it's spontaneous, uncontrived, you can reach the path before then, if it's sincere, that connects the days of your life, however many more there may be. We just know it's finite, that's all. But that's what connects lifetime by lifetime. It's that unresolved, unfulfilled aspiration. Oh, you haven't achieved enlightenment yet? Oh, then that's your leto, that's your momentum carrying on over the next lifetime. And if there's virtue behind it, then you'll encounter, by the power of that virtue, and so forth, then you'll encounter the qualified teachers, the splendid teachings, the good Dharma friends, the leisure and opportunity to practice. You'll encounter that, because that's how your virtue is manifesting. But if you wanted something else, that's where it's going, right? That's where it's going. So this is emphasized so strongly for enormously good reasons. And with such a motivation, then let's venture into this text. Almost always when I'm teaching, like in these 8-week retreats, or teaching almost anything else, I'm almost always teaching from my own translations, because then I know exactly the word choice and so forth. I know exactly where the Tibetan is, because I'm familiar with my own translation style. But this is a text I just never got around to translating, the root text and the commentary. But a very fine scholar, I think he must be he is my generation, so he's within a few years of my age. Roger Jackson, old-time student of Jeffrey Hopkins, who's one of my own teachers as well. He, outstanding scholar, really first-rate. He's done a translation of both the root text and the commentary, and of course he has, other things he's adding to this, and he's planning to publish it. And he's done something quite remarkable for authors and translators. I know, because I'm one of both. By and large, authors and translators do not let their work out until it's published. Because if they give it out and then somebody puts it on the internet, you've just blown your chances of getting published. Because nobody's going to publish a book that's already for free on the internet, right? And so I just want to express very publicly my very deep gratitude for Roger Jackson's generosity, his trust, his kindness. Because he's trusting us, and he's trusting everybody listening to the podcast, that we will not in any way create any obstacles to taking his very fine work, which is certainly worthy of publication. I think it's definitely going to be published. It's first-rate work. But that would be blocked if somebody took these teachings and put them on the internet just for fun or whatever, or for whatever motivation. And so I want to thank Roger for this. And so what I asked him permission just for the people in this retreat physically, that they have a physical copy, the hard copy, of his translations of the root text and commentary. And it's for your own personal use. Of course, you can share it with friends, but it must not go digital. It must definitely not go onto the internet. And that's why I have to apologize for everybody listening about the podcast. I simply couldn't ask for that. I think that was asking just too much, because then any kind of control is lost. And it's not that I don't trust the people on the podcast, I just don't know who's on the podcast. And so people listening by way of podcast, hold to every word, because the words are being dropped into your mind stream as I give you the oral transmission of this text. But then I can add this too. I'm very happy that Glenn Svensson has made his own translation, a complete translation of the root text, and a partial translation of the commentary. So not quite complete, but I'm sure certainly he's selected really very important parts of the commentary. And Glenn has offered this to be in the public domain. So I'll send my copy. He sent me the PDF some time ago. I'll send this to Sangye Wangmo. Anybody listening by podcast, just go to the website for the podcast. You can download it right there. That will serve you very well. And you might see some interesting variations, because Glenn is a very fine scholar, Roger as well. So the difference you'll see are probably not one got it right and one got it wrong, but just more nuances of translation, and that just enriches the understanding. So there we are. So let's just jump right in. And in terms of these afternoon sessions of an hour and a half, kind of a little bit to my surprise, last winter in Australia, summer in the northern hemisphere, there was actually very little time for question and answer in the group, because the text kind of just swept me in, and that tended to fill the whole time. I thought it was really, from my perspective, the best 8-week retreat we've ever had. I was so happy with it, so very content. But of course, it would have been nice to have question and answer. But what we did have, thanks to my dear Dharma brother, Glenn, he held a lot of question and answer sessions during that 8-week retreat. He's offered to do so again during this retreat. He's very knowledgeable, so definitely, if you wish, avail yourself of his kindness in this regard. And whether that we'll have time for question and answers during these afternoon sessions, I don't know. Just have to see. I just try to make the afternoon sessions as meaningful as possible. And sometimes that entails question and answer session. Sometimes it doesn't. Go figure. Okay? So let's just jump right in. So what I'm going for here is simply his commentary, because the root text is embedded in the commentary. And so we're covering both in one text. And this is Lamp So Bright. So within your, for those of you who have it, you'll see the root text is separate. There's no real reason to look at that now. You can always allude to that later. But right now I'm going to give the oral transmission and commentary. There's no empowerment with this, because this is Sutrayana teaching. So the issue of empowerment doesn't come up. So I will just be giving the transmission and the commentary on the oral commentary on his root text and written commentary. So the author of this text is the first or the fourth Panchen Lama. His personal name was Panchen Lozang Chökyi Gyaltsen. You can see his date of birth and his death. And so he was, as I mentioned before, he was the root guru, the Lama of the fourth Dalai Lama and the fifth Dalai Lama. So a man of enormous stature, truly a great contemplative, a great scholar, a great adept. And he was the first one that was, during his lifetime, identified as the Panchen Lama. Okay, so in that regard, he's the first. But then what happens not infrequently, also happened with the Dalai Lama, is then retrospectively, when he or those who are around him look into his past life, they say, well, in his past life he was this. So, and before that, this, and before that. And so they go back to Tsongkhapa and his two principal disciples, Kedubje and Gendupa, Gyawa Gendupa. And so retrospectively, Gyawa Gendupa is regarded as the first Dalai Lama, even though nobody at that time called him the Dalai Lama. Right? That came later. But when they looked into the past lives of the first Dalai Lama that was recognized as the Dalai Lama, it traced back to one of the two principal disciples of Tsongkhapa. And the same is true for the Panchen Lama. When they traced it back, then that goes to Tsongkhapa's other great disciple. On Tsongkhapa's right is Gyawa Gendupa, on his left, the Kedubje. Okay? So in that enumeration, Kedubje was the first Panchen Lama, and then there was the second, the third, and then the fourth in that line of these reincarnations was the Panchen Rinpoche. Okay? So enumeration, it is after all nominal, but that's why you see first versus fourth. So he is the author. And then this commentary is called Lamp So Bright, just going from the translation. But I can tell you what I've already begun, and I will do for the rest of this teaching period. I'm comparing Roger's translation to the original Tibetan, and Roger invited me also to give him some feedback on the translation as my expression of gratitude for his kindness. I'm doing that, so I'll give him detailed comments, just my thoughts. So there we are. So this is the Lamp So Bright, an extensive explanation of the Mahamudra root text of the teaching tradition of the precious Geiden oral transmission. Geiden refers to the Gelugpa tradition. It's Geiden, Ganden, and Gelugpa. So they're just synonyms. Rio, let's not elaborate, it's just intellectual stuff. But the Geiden is referring to the Gelugpa. But now the oral transmission, this is Kagyü, and it does mean oral transmission. And so this can be interpreted in either of two ways, and actually both are really good interpretations. According to His Holiness Dalai Lama, who gave a detailed commentary on the root text, which Alex Berzin translated, so I think you're all familiar with that, His Holiness interpreted this Kagyü as Kagyü, that this is the oral transmission or the teaching tradition of the union, integration of the Gelugpa and the Kagyü tradition. And there's very good reason for drawing that conclusion. Okay? When Geshe Rabten taught me this, and collection of disciples, I wasn't alone, he also interpreted Gelugpa and Kagyü, that this is coming together. Much as Gampopa, for example, brought together the Gadampa tradition of going back to Atisha and the Kagyü tradition going back to Marpa, Milarepa, Marpa, Naropa, and so forth. Integrated these two. So that's Gampopa's lineage. Integrating these two, so does the Panchen Lama integrate the Kagyü teachings with the Gelugpa teachings on Mahamudra. On the one hand, right? But then Kagyü also simply means oral lineage or oral transmission. Transmission is good. Gyü really means kind of a lineage, a sequence. And we'll see, he lays this out himself, that just within the Gelugpa tradition itself, there was a lineage of Mahamudra, and he's drawing on that. And according to Roger Jackson's research, he was the first Gelug Lama to actually write down teachings on Mahamudra. So it could very well have been, and Roger never refutes this, there's no reason to refute it, that it may very well have been an oral lineage from his teacher going back, wasn't written down. Many teachings aren't written down. That's okay. So that's what this is about. So there it is, that's the title. And the root text, you can see that's in verse, and the commentary is in prose. So we go to page 2. This is, now within the text, he gives the title, Lamp So Bright, an extensive explanation of the Mahamudra root text of the teaching tradition of the Precious Gelug oral transmission. Then we begin as usual with the homage and the commitment, the pledge to compose the text in a very auspicious way. With the homage, a way to start the text, and with the pledge to complete it, this is kind of an auspicious starting that he won't stop halfway through and say, oh, what the heck, who needs that? And then not complete his composition. So this is a very, very classic approach within the Indo-Tibetan tradition. So he begins with Namo Mahamudraya, Namo, homage, to, this Mudraya is simply to Mahamudra. And then his verse. In Tibetan, of course, this is it is verse, so it has a meter to it. That's almost always lost in English translation. The languages are just too different. So here's his verse of homage. The gnosis of all the ubiquitous Buddhas is the joyous dance of one in saffron robes. To the lotus feet of the exalted Guru, triply kind, I respectfully bow down. Okay? So, gnosis is Roger's translation for yeshe, which many people translate it as primordial wisdom, which are 5 kinds. I translate it very literally, yeshe, primordial consciousness. But gnosis is actually a very good translation as well, because it suggests a type of knowing that's beyond the domain of logic, intellect, reasoning, and so forth, more intuitive. So Christian Gnosticism, for example, these are stemming from visionary teachings, with pure vision that we find so very frequently in the Tibetan tradition, the Dzogchen tradition, in Tsongkhapa himself. Some of his teachings are when he's having a pure vision of Manjushri and has question and answer session with Manjushri. Okay, well that's not something he arrived at just by keeping his eyes open, by simple perception, or let alone by logic. It's coming from a much deeper space, right? So gnosis is a good translation. It's not an etymological translation, but so what? So it's a good translation. And ubiquitous means, of course, all-pervasive, the all-pervasiveness of the Buddha mind, of Dharmakaya. But the gnosis, this is the joyous dance of one in saffron robes, referring to Buddha Shakyamuni, or specifically to his own Guru, to the lotus feet of the exalted Guru, his own Lama, triply kind, with the threefold kindness. And the threefold kindness is granting Wang Lung Ti in Tibetan. Empowerment, in the context of Vajrayana Buddhism. The Lama grants empowerment first. If you're teaching only Sutrayana, that doesn't come up. But Vajrayana, empowerment. If you're kind of, full duty, you're performing all the necessary functions of a Lama, right? So first is empowerment. Lung is oral transmission. And Tit is the oral commentary, the actual guidance in the text, in teachings, providing personal guidance to your disciples. So his Guru is imbued with these 3 modes of kindness, and to this Guru, I would use the word reverently, because it's beyond mere respect. It really is coming from a deeper place. I often say that I have great respect for Einstein, but reverence for His Holiness Dalai Lama. That pretty much sums it up. Of course I respect the Dalai Lama, but I don't really feel reverence for Einstein. It doesn't. I've read it. I know a lot about his life. I've read a number of biographies. I have great respect for him, but it doesn't touch me in the depth that the life of His Holiness, or Tsongkhapa, or Dujum Lingpa. That goes much deeper than respect. So, just translator's nuance. So there's his homage, and of course he would know nothing about Mahamudra. The word wouldn't even mean anything were it not for his own lamas who breathed life into this vision. It's more than just reading books, of course. but to really immerse yourself, to enter into and immerse yourself in the practice of Mahamudra, there simply is no substitute for having a personal teacher, a guide, a mentor, and that's the Guru. So therefore his homage is there. And then his pledge to compose this root text and commentary, I will explain the light shining brightly on Mahamudra, that which clearly illuminates Mahamudra, which is the mind elixir of the conquerors of the three times. I'm going to pause there. I would differ on this point. It's the term translated here as mind elixir in Tibetan is ju. Ju. Don't think that is a very good translation. There's another word, tsi. That means elixir, like an alchemical elixir that transmutes base metals into gold. That's an elixir. But the term ju doesn't actually have that connotation at all. The word chu really means like vital essence. And I'll show you why. There's a term, actually, I've received the transmission on this, ju len. It's a type of meditative practice where you take the vital energy, the vital essence, kind of the sheer vitality of like flower petals and other basic ingredients of a very small quantity. You empower that with your meditation, drawing in the chu, the vital essence of the 5 elements of your surrounding environment by the power of imagination as a stage of generation practitioner. You draw this in, and you imagine 5 colored rays of light emerging in on these little pills about the size of a large marble, and they're made primarily of just flower petals, a little bit of tsamba, a little bit of butter, a little bit of honey, some other just spices. I've done it actually. And then into this, you just basically, it's like a vacuum. You're drawing in not some mind elixir, but the vital essence of the elements of your surrounding environment, so that if you achieve this practice, then you can live just on three of these pills a day. And you can live on that. You can go steady state for months on end. And you drink as much water as you can, as much as you wish. And so once you've shifted, it takes about 3 weeks if you're successful. And you shift from eating coarse food to eating only these energized chutlen. Chutlen means pills in which you've taken the vital essence, the nutritive essence of the environment, and you just eat these, and what happens is your whole gastrointestinal tract shifts. So you no longer have any bowel movements. So it's important for those 3 weeks that you're really cleansing, drink a lot of water to cleanse out your whole gastrointestinal tract. You don't want to be carrying around feces in your tract, for weeks and months on end. Bad idea. But then you just live, and so all that you're taking in, your body absorbs. And so that's the chu and the dhamma. Dhamma is the residue. That's what we normally expel in the feces and so forth. What the body didn't need, it gets rid of. And that's the dhamma, that's the residue. Whereas the body keeps the chu. It's the vital essence. So that's my case. And this is the vital essence. So this Mahamudra, it's the vital essence. Okay? This comes up a lot in Tibetan medicine. The chu and dhamma. The chu is the vital essence of your food and so forth. The dhamma is what you expel. You expel it through grime, coming out of the pores. That's what your body doesn't need. Sweat your body doesn't need. That's why it comes out. Urine comes out. Didn't need that. Feces comes out. Didn't need that. Eye goo. Didn't need it. Comes out. Earwax. Didn't need it. Comes out. Kind of sounds disgusting, doesn't it? Like we human beings are just exuding all these disgusting qualities. You can look like Marilyn Monroe, but her eye wax is pretty much everybody else's. And so we're just kind of giving off what we don't need, and the body keeps what it doesn't, right? So there we are. So this is the vital essence of the conquerors, the Jinas. I always come back to the Sanskrit. The Jinas, the victorious ones. Those who've gained victory over two, that is, they've conquered the 2 types of obscurations, afflictive obscurations, the kleshas that an arhat gets rid of, but also jnana avarana, cognitive obscurations that only a Buddha is free of, right? That enables the Dharmakaya to fully manifest with all its power of compassion, wisdom, and power. So what is this vital essence of all the victorious ones, all the Buddhas, of course, of the 3 times, past, present, and future? What is this Mahamudra? It's the vital essence of all of them. It is the essential meaning of the sea or the ocean of sutras and tantras, and it is the road traversed by all the lordly adepts. And adepts is translation for siddha. So we have pandits, the great scholars, those of tremendous erudition, And we have the siddhas, and these are the ones with deep accomplishment. They'll often display siddhis, which means paranormal abilities. They'll all kinds of interesting things as they tap into the powers of the mind. So, and what is this Mahamudra? It literally means great seal. It's variation of the theme, but that's a pretty good translation. And what it's referring to is, on the one hand, it's referring to Dharmadhatu, emptiness, ultimate reality. But not simply emptiness, but emptiness as something indivisible from, primordially non-dual from, Dharmakaya, primordial consciousness, Buddha nature, pristine awareness. It is that fundamental non-duality, primordial non-duality, indifferentiability of the two. They're not two things slapped together. That's Mahamudra. So it is the ground, it's already there. Then you're practicing Mahamudra, it's the path. And then you realize Mahamudra, which is the great Mahamudra. Well, you realize that's the great city. That's the supreme city. That's Buddhahood. So Mahamudra is the ground, the path, and the fruition. Okay? That's why he would say, very literally, this is the vital essence of all the victorious ones. How did they become Buddhas? Because of Mahamudra. What was the path they followed? Mahamudra. Okay? It's the ground path and it is the fruition. So, that's what he's now agreed to compose. Here is the instruction on the Mahamudra oral tradition of those wise and accomplished holy beings. Okay, wise, this is Pandit, this is Kepa in Tibetan. So the Pandits, like the great scholars, the great Pandits of Nalanda, Vikramashila and so forth, and then there are the Siddhas, Tilopa, Naropa, Saraha, Virupa, these great Mahasiddhas of India. That's the Siddha tradition. Okay? And sometimes they converge, as in the case of Naropa. Great Pandit, for sure. I mean, top-ranked Pandit. But then he's Naropa. After doing his Pandit business, then he went off, sought out his Siddha teacher, right? And then became a Mahasiddha himself, right? Milarepa was a great Siddha, but not a Pandit. Marpa was both. Tsongkhapa was both. Sakya Pandita was both. Nowadays, and pretty much any time, there are some great scholars, great Pandits, but haven't put in the time to become great Siddhas. There are those who put in the time, and they are great Siddhas, but not necessarily great Pandits, and there are some who are both. But this is the oral tradition of the Pandits and the Siddhas, these holy beings, and this instruction comes in 3 parts. Very classic format. First of all, the preface, the preamble to the main body of the text, to the composition. Then the explanation of the composition's actual instructions, the main body. And then, when he's finished, then dedication of the virtue arising from the composition. So it kind of boils down to this old cliché you've heard many times. If you're going to give a public address, say what you're going to say. Then say it. And then say what you've said. Well, that's what he's doing. I think the Buddhists came up with it first. Who knows? Okay, so now we go to the preface, his preamble. Munjit, just that preface. So in order to show oneself in accord with those whose behavior is quintessentially holy, in order to be in that same stream, compatible with, harmonious with, one prostrates to the special objects. Okay? Expression of humility, of devotion, of reverence. And then, so that's to be in alignment with the conduct of those great beings of the past. And in order to complete the composition, one makes a general promise to compose. So, here we are. So the preceding one, Namo Mahāmudrāya, that was his homage for the commentary, and then his pledge to compose the commentary. And now we see, as you'll notice on the first page, when we have these all caps, all capital letters, and it's all in italics, now he's citing his own root text. Okay? And they're not the same, of course. So, but it begins with the same homage to Mahamudra, Namo Mahāmudrāya, and now the homage within the root text. I bow reverently, I would say, I reverently bow to the feet of my peerless Guru, the sovereign master and lord of adepts, of siddhas, who plainly, and that is clearly, teaches or reveals Mahamudra, The all-pervasive intrinsic nature is simply svabhava or ranjin, so simply nature, the all-pervasive nature of everything. And what is this all-pervasive nature of everything, the ultimate all-pervasive nature? The term is in Tibetan dorje ying, or vajradhatu. Dhatu. The term is in Tibetan dorje ying, or vajradhatu. Dhatu. I've never seen dhatu refer to the mind in any context. So it's a small point, but I don't think it refers to mind. It says in dharma dhatu. Dharma dhatu, it's the, I translated various translations, but absolute space of phenomena. Dharma dhatu is emptiness. Emptiness, right? And so dhatu, when they say dhatu, it's usually an abbreviation of dharma dhatu. Dharma dhatu. Unless you're speaking totally within the mundane context, within Abhidharma, and then you might recall you have the 5 skandhas, right? You have the 12 sense bases, and then you have the 18 dhatus, the 18 elements, that's dhatu. But these are all mundane. The dhatus are the visual domain, the auditory, and so forth. 6 domains of experience, 6 faculties, independence upon which 6 modes of consciousness arise. So you have 6 modes of consciousness, 6 faculties, independence upon which the 6 modes of consciousness, 5 sensory and mental, arise, and then the 6 domains of experience. Visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, and then mental, right? So in a relative context, there are 18. But when we go to dharma dhatu, that actually has 2 meanings. Dharma dhatu on a relative level just refers to the domain of what is mentally perceived, mentally experienced. But of course, as I gaze over at Sophia, for example, or Ussel, I tend visually to her visual appearance, and I'm bringing my visual perception, one of the 18 dhatus, to the visual appearance of this person. So the colors of her face and so forth appears. But in so doing, I'm not just having visual impressions arising, because I'm turning my attention, and so I'm turning my mental awareness, as I am right now to you, or to Claudio, and anybody here. I'm directing my visual gaze, but piggybacking on that, I'm also directing my mental awareness. So I'm mentally aware of Claudio, of Jeffrey, of Ursula, Amy, and so forth, as well as visually, right? And so anything that I'm aware of mentally fits into the category of dharma dhatu on the relative level. Ultimate dharma dhatu, well, that's emptiness. That's nirvana, right? But now he says, but you see it here. The indivisible, inexpressible. Well, indivisible, what's indivisible? If you say one thing, if we say Jeffrey is indivisible, the question is, yeah, finish the sentence. Indivisible from what? Right? There have to be 2 things, 2 or more, right? And so what I would suggest here is that Vajra, which means, refers to that which is immutable. Well, it's referring to, in the Mahamudra context, it's referring to Rigpa, pristine awareness. And in the Kagyü tradition, be very careful here, don't want to mix things up, can lead to confusion, but within the Kagyü tradition, the Dzogchen tradition, Rigpa is immutable. Dharmakaya is immutable, right? Now, there's debates about that elsewhere, but here it's just a factual statement. This dimension of reality, it transcends all conceptual frameworks. It has Rigpa, pristine awareness, Buddha nature, Tathagata Garbha, has the 7 qualities of a Vajra. 7 qualities. Immutability is all variations on that theme, which means unborn, unarising, transcending time. It's in the 4th time. And so Vajra often symbolizes this dimension of consciousness. The Vajra here, within this Dzogchen or Mahamudra context, the Vajra held in the right hand, is symbolizing Dharmakaya. The skull cup, or it could be the bell, symbolizing emptiness. Right? And so, what I would suggest here is that Vajra is referring to Dharmakaya. It's referring to Rigpa, primordial consciousness, Yeshe, or Gnosis. But then he says, Vajra Dhatu. It's an unusual compound. But Dhatu, I would suggest, means Dharma Dhatu, and that which is indivisible and inexpressible, ineffable, is that primordial non-duality of Dharmakaya and Dharma Dhatu. And again, I've just never seen Dhatu referred to mind as such. So I would suggest realm of the Vajra, the indivisible, inexpressible Vajra realm. Dharma Dhatu, Vajra realm, and then you know what you're putting together. Vajra and realm as in absolute place of phenomena, Dharma Dhatu. Okay? He does say realm of the Vajra mind, so he's not actually translating Dhatu as mind, but then Vajra means Vajra, it doesn't say Vajra mind. So there we are. But we have to have, when you say indivisible, you have to have two things that are indivisible, right? Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. So there we are. So there's his refuge, and now his commitment to compose. Collecting the elixir, this is once again the vital essence of the sea, again I would say ocean. And he says here, Sutra and Tantra special instructions. I would interpret it differently. I'm not saying it's incorrect, I would just interpret it differently. Again, my training for the last 26 years has been really overwhelmingly Dzogchen, Nyingma, and some Kagyü Mahamudra. And what we find there, very commonly, it's all over the place, is these different categories of the teachings. We have the category of the teachings of the sutras, and these are the Buddhist discourses, setting forth the Shravakayana path, the Pratyeka Buddha path, the Bodhisattva path, the sutra teachings. And then we have the tantras, and these are also, of course, ascribed to the Buddha, right? In addition to those teachings, these kama, these textual or scriptural sources in the sutras and tantras, in addition to that, then you have upadesha, mengar. These are the pith instructions, where you've taken the vital essence, you've taken the core, you've taken this vast ocean of teachings, and now you've drawn it into kind of what would you put in a cup, drink it, and be transformed. And so my interpretation, right or wrong, maybe I'm flat out wrong here, but it won't be catastrophically wrong, is that this is referring to the sutras, tantras, and what I call pith instructions. Pith instructions. And not simply that they're special, there are a lot of things that are special, but these are pith instructions. We've gone to right to the very core of it. Okay? So collecting the vital essence of the ocean of the sutras, tantras, and pith instructions, because that's indeed what he has done. I shall write the instructions of the Mahāmudrā oral tradition, of the supreme adept Dharmavajra, father and son, who possess, that is, a father and son, this is multiple. Father and son, of course, doesn't, especially in the Gelug tradition, doesn't refer to a father and his kid, but the father like Tsongkhapa, when they say Jeyapse, Tsongkhapa and the father Tsongkhapa and his sons. Tsongkhapa was a monk, he had no children, but it's referring to his two principal disciples, Gendup and Kedupche. Right? And so this is very standard. Sometimes, on occasion, it does actually refer to the son, but normally it doesn't. It refers to spiritual son. Okay, and so Dharmavajra and his core disciple or disciples, who possess the Geiden oral transmission and instructed well. And so this Dharmavajra, this is the first one he cites within the Mahāmudrā lineage within the Gelugpa tradition. And Dharmavajra was indeed one of the great Gelugpa pundits and siddhas. And he's in direct lineage of Tsongkhapa. He comes after Tsongkhapa, but he's of that lineage. And then his son, his spiritual son, was Gyalwa Enzapa. And this is actually the previous incarnation of the Panchen Rinpoche. If the Panchen Rinpoche is the fourth Panchen, then Gyalwa Enzapa is the third. Okay? So he's actually offering homage to his previous incarnation. Not uncommon, because he was a great being, so show homage. And then Gyalwa Ensapa's, his core disciple, his lineage holder that he passed it on to, was Kedup Sangye Yeshe, and Kedup Sangye Yeshe was the Panchen Rinpoche's own root guru. So the Panchen Rinpoche received the oral transmission of Mahāmudrā from his teacher, his root lama, Kedup Sangye Yeshe. He received it from Gyalwa Ensapa, the Panchen Rinpoche's previous incarnation, and he received it from Dharmavajra. And then there's ... between him and Tsongkhapa. So did Tsongkhapa ever teach Mahāmudrā? And Roger Jackner, I think, has done very good research in this regard, says, well, he may very well have, but we simply have no written document of any text by Tsongkhapa, or these other earlier ones, of written text in the Gelugpa tradition on Mahāmudrā. Does that mean they didn't have any? Not necessarily. It could have been simply an oral transmission. Bear in mind the 7-point mind training. It traces back to Atisha, but it wasn't written down until Geshe Chekawa. So I don't really think it's correct to say Geshe Chekawa was the author when he was basically just the first person to put it into writing. I always ascribe it to Atisha. Right? So Atisha wrote down the lamp for the lamp for the path to enlightenment, but he's also the source of the 7-point mind training. But I have checked out a little bit, rather superficially, Tsongkhapa's own writings. And in his medium exposition of the stages of the path, the medium Lamrim, in his Shamatha section, he does make a very brief but pithy reference to a mode of Shamatha where what you're attending to is the sheer cognizance and luminosity of your own mind. He says that. Riktsam seltsam. That's all you're attending to. Nothing outside of your own awareness, nothing outside of the luminosity of your own awareness. So in other words, it's not that you don't have an object, you do. You're aware of your own awareness and the luminosity of your own awareness, but you're not attending to anything outside. There's no directionality, right? Here there's a vector. I'm attending to you, and we'll often use the metaphor of I will use the rope of mindfulness to fasten the elephant of my mind to you as my meditative object, and that I discipline my mind, right? But when you're resting in awareness, and it's a reflexive awareness of simply being aware of being aware, the knowing of knowing, and the knowing of the sheer luminosity of your own awareness, well, that's a very deep shamatha practice, and it's quintessentially Mahamudra. So it doesn't take much of a leap to say maybe he was making a subtle reference there. And if I remember correctly, then he follows that quite quickly with references to do this very deeply, and out comes bliss, luminosity, and non-conceptuality. That's really classic for the Mahamudra and Dzogchen tradition. Really classic. And one should understand, I think probably all of you do, you've been following the podcast and what have you, that in that triad, de samidokpa, so easy to say in Tibetan, bliss, luminosity, and non-conceptuality, that these are simply the qualities of your awareness when you've achieved shamatha. It's not referring to the bliss of state of completion practice. It's not referring to non-conceptuality of direct realization of emptiness. It's right there on the mundane level. But it's again classic Mahamudra terminology and Dzogchen terminology as well. And Tsongkhapa was trained in both. Right? Olaso. So father and son, that refers to Dhammavajra and his principal disciple Gyalwai Wensapa, who was the third Panchen Lama, if you're following Panchen Rinpoche being the fourth. Okay? So he's just cited his own text, the root text. And then he says, because it is not difficult to understand the meaning of these two stanzas, I have nothing more to say. I will not write about them in detail. So I saw Roger Jackson saying a little bit, I say, very playfully, a bit frustrated, like, couldn't you have told us what you meant by Kagyü? Are you really writing a commentary that fuses the Gelugpa tradition with the Kagyü tradition? Is that what you're doing? Or are you simply referring to the oral lineage of the Gelugpa tradition? Inquiring minds want to know. And Panchen Rinpoche doesn't tell you. And I would just draw the conclusion, hey, both interpretations make really good sense. So Alex Berzin, when he was translating His Holiness's, translated the root text and the commentary, he said Gelug, or Ganden, and Kagyü. And His Holiness taught that way, so Alex was translating what His Holiness said. But this is a perfectly good translation, because it's also true. And that's what he says here. He's not saying, I'm going to write what Gampopa said and the Karmapa said, and citing various Kagyupa masters, and how that interrelates with the great Gelugpa masters. Not saying that. He's just citing Gelugpa masters. So that would give some credence, maybe, which is referring to the oral lineage of the Gelugpa tradition, which maybe was an ear-whispered tradition before he wrote it down. And maybe it indeed does stem from Tsongkhapa himself. Tsongkhapa was very eclectic, very ecumenical, very non-sectarian. So way later in the 19th century, he starts this great big remet tradition, non-sectarian tradition. Tsongkhapa was already not very non-sectarian. It really was. It's not an exaggeration. Olaso. So I'm going to pause there. We've begun, and then we'll go into explanation of the composition's actual instruction, the main body of the text. It starts out very juicy, but I'm going to pause right there. We have a few minutes. Any questions?